The Byzantine Empire emerges from the twilight of ancient Rome as one of history's most enduring civilizations, spanning over 11 centuries from the 4th century Anno Domini until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. This empire, which contemporaries knew simply as the Roman Empire, represented the eastern continuation of imperial Roman authority long after the western territories had succumbed to barbarian conquest and political fragmentation. The story of Byzantium unfolds as a testament to adaptability, cultural synthesis, and the remarkable capacity of human institutions to evolve while maintaining fundamental continuity across vast spans of time. The empire's origins trace directly to the momentous decision of Emperor Constantine the Great in 330 Anno Domini to establish a new imperial capital on the ancient site of Byzantium, a Greek colony founded in the 7th century before Christ on the strategic Bosphorus Strait. Constantine's choice reflected both practical military considerations and grand imperial ambitions that would reshape the balance of Mediterranean civilization. The location offered unparalleled strategic advantages, controlling the narrow passage between Europe and Asia while commanding access to the Black Sea's rich agricultural hinterlands and the lucrative trade routes, connecting the Mediterranean world with the markets of Central Asia and the Far East. The new city, initially named Nova Roma, but quickly adopting the designation of Constantinople in honor of its founder, embodied Constantine's vision of a Christian Rome, freed from the pagan associations that still clung to the ancient capital on the Tiber. The emperor invested enormous resources in creating architectural monuments that would rival and ultimately surpass the magnificence of old Rome. The great palace complex stretched across multiple terraces, overlooking the Sea of Marmara, while the Hippodrome provided a massive venue for the chariot races and public spectacles that remained central to Roman civic life. The city's defensive position between the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara, protected by formidable land walls that would prove impregnable for over 1,000 years, established Constantinople as perhaps the most secure major city in the medieval world. Constantine's religious policies fundamentally altered the character of imperial civilization by establishing Christianity as the empire's favored religion through the Edict of Milan in 313 Anno Domini and his personal conversion prior to the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. This transformation created profound changes in imperial ideology, administrative practices, and cultural expression that distinguished the Eastern Empire from its Western counterpart even before formal political division occurred. The emperor's convening of the Council of Nicaea in 325 established precedents for imperial intervention in ecclesiastical affairs that would characterize Byzantine governance throughout its existence, creating a unique synthesis of temporal and spiritual authority that scholars term caesaropapism. The gradual divergence between eastern and western portions of the Roman Empire accelerated during the 4th century as administrative, military, and cultural differences became increasingly pronounced. The eastern territories enjoyed greater economic stability due to their control of established trade networks connecting Europe with Asia and Africa, while their urban centers maintained higher population levels and more sophisticated commercial and manufacturing activities than their Western counterparts. Greek language and culture experienced a renaissance in the East as educated elites rediscovered classical literature and philosophy, creating intellectual movements that synthesized Christian theology with ancient Greek philosophical traditions. The formal division of the Roman Empire occurred in 395 Anno Domini, following the death of Emperor Theodosius the Great, when his 2 sons inherited separate spheres of authority. Arcadius received control of the eastern territories, with Constantinople as his capital, while Honorius governed the Western Empire from Milan and later Ravenna. This partition, initially intended as a temporary administrative convenience, became permanent as the 2 halves of the empire developed distinct political cultures, military systems, and diplomatic relationships with neighboring powers. The Eastern Empire's early centuries witnessed remarkable territorial expansion and cultural development under a succession of capable emperors who successfully defended their borders while extending imperial authority into new regions. The Theodosian walls, completed in 413 Anno Domini, during the reign of Theodosius II, provided Constantinople with virtually impregnable land defenses that would protect the city from numerous sieges over the following millennium. These massive fortifications, featuring double walls with intervening spaces and strategically placed towers, represented the pinnacle of late Roman military engineering and enabled the empire to withstand attacks by Huns, Avars, Bulgars, Arabs, and other hostile forces. Throughout the medieval period, the development of a distinctly Byzantine administrative system during the 5th and 6th centuries created governmental institutions that balanced imperial authority with provincial autonomy while maintaining the legal and bureaucratic traditions inherited from classical Rome. The Eastern Empire's ability to collect taxes efficiently, maintain professional military forces, and administer justice through established legal procedures distinguished it from the increasingly feudalized societies that emerged in Western Europe following the collapse of Roman authority. The codification of Roman law under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century preserved legal principles and procedures that would influence European jurisprudence for centuries, while establishing institutional frameworks that enabled the Byzantine state to function effectively despite frequent military pressures and political upheavals. The reign of Emperor Justinian I, from 527 to 565, Anno Domini, represents the Byzantine Empire's most ambitious attempt to restore the territorial extent and cultural unity of the classical Roman Empire. Born into a peasant family in the Balkans, Justinian rose to power through his uncle Justin's military career and demonstrated remarkable vision in his efforts to reunify the Mediterranean world under imperial authority. His marriage to Theodora, a former actress whose humble origins scandalized the traditional aristocracy, created a partnership that combined political acumen with social reform initiatives that addressed the concerns of Constantinople's urban population. Justinian's legal reforms fundamentally transformed the character of imperial administration through the comprehensive codification of Roman law, known as the Corpus Juris Civilis or Justinian Code. This massive project, supervised by the Juris Tribonian, systematically organized centuries of imperial legislation, legal precedents, and jurisprudential commentary into a coherent framework that remained the foundation of European legal systems for over a millennium. The Code's four main components address different aspects of legal practice. The Codex compiled imperial constitutions. The Digest preserved the writings of classical jurists. The Institutes provided an introductory legal textbook, and the Novelle recorded new legislation issued during Justinian's reign. The emperor's architectural program transformed Constantinople into the most magnificent city in the medieval world through construction projects that demonstrated imperial wealth and artistic sophistication while serving important religious and political functions. The rebuilding of the Hagia Sophia following its destruction during the Nika riots of 532 created the architectural masterpiece that would serve as the template for Orthodox church design throughout the Byzantine sphere of influence. The building's revolutionary engineering, featuring a massive dome supported by pendentives and half-arms, created interior spaces of unprecedented scale and grandeur that symbolized the union of earthly and divine authority under imperial rule. Justinian's military campaigns aimed at recovering the western territories lost to barbarian conquest achieved remarkable initial success through the brilliant generalship of Belisarius and Narses. The reconquest of North Africa from the Vandals between 533 and 534 restored imperial control over the wealthy provinces that had sustained Roman civilization for centuries, while eliminating a major threat to Mediterranean shipping routes. The campaign's rapid success encouraged further military adventures in Italy, where Byzantine forces gradually wrested control from the Ostrogothic kingdom through a series of brutal conflicts that devastated the peninsula's urban centers and rural infrastructure. The Italian Wars, lasting from 535 to 553, ultimately succeeded in restoring imperial authority over most of the peninsula, including Rome itself, but at enormous cost in both resources and human suffering. The prolonged campaigns required massive financial expenditures that strained the empire's treasury while diverting military forces from other threatened frontiers. The destruction caused by decades of warfare left Italy's economy shattered and its population severely reduced, creating long-term problems that would limit the benefits of reconquest and contribute to the empire's eventual loss of these territories too. Lombard invasion in the following century. The emperor's ecclesiastical policies sought to establish doctrinal unity throughout the empire while asserting imperial authority over church affairs in ways that created lasting tensions between Eastern and Western Christianity. Justinian's attempts to resolve the Monophysite controversy through theological compromise satisfied neither the Orthodox mainstream nor the dissenting communities, particularly in Egypt and Syria, where Christological disputes reflected deeper cultural and political grievances against imperial rule. The emperor's condemnation of the three chapters in 544, intended to appease Monophysite concerns while maintaining Orthodox doctrine, instead alienated Western churches and contributed to growing divisions between Constantinople and Rome. The devastating plague that struck the empire, beginning in 541, known historically as the Plague of Justinian, represented one of the most catastrophic demographic disasters in recorded history. The pandemic, likely caused by the same bacterium responsible for later Black Death outbreaks, originated in Egypt and spread rapidly throughout the Mediterranean basin via trade networks. Contemporary accounts describe mortality rates reaching 30 to 40% in affected urban areas, with Constantinople losing nearly half its population during the peak years of the outbreak. The plague's economic and military consequences fundamentally altered the trajectory of Justinian's reign and the empire's long-term prospects. The massive population losses created severe labor shortages that disrupted agricultural production, manufacturing, and military recruitment at precisely the moment when the empire faced renewed threats from Sassanid Persia in the east and barbarian pressure along the Danube frontier. The resulting fiscal crisis forced reductions in military expenditures and administrative services that weakened imperial authority throughout the provinces and contributed to territorial losses that would never be fully recovered. The Sassanid wars that dominated the latter portion of Justinian's reign demonstrated the empire's strategic vulnerabilities, despite its impressive territorial extent under the Reconquest program. The Persian Empire under Khosrow I proved a formidable adversary whose military capabilities and diplomatic sophistication matched those of Byzantium, creating a costly stalemate that drained resources from both empires while providing opportunities for their various enemies to exploit their mutual exhaustion. The Eternal Peace Treaty of 532, which had temporarily ended hostilities, broke down in 540 when Khosrow invaded Syria and captured Antioch, one of the empire's most important eastern cities. The sack of Antioch revealed the limits of Byzantine military power and the empire's inability to simultaneously maintain extensive Western reconquest operations while defending established territories in the east. Khosrow's methodical destruction of the city and deportation of its population to Persia eliminated a major center of imperial administration and commerce, while demonstrating to other subject populations potential consequences of continued resistance to Persian expansion. The emperor's efforts to negotiate Antioch's return through diplomatic means ultimately failed, requiring expensive military campaigns that achieved limited success at enormous cost. The architectural legacy of Justinian's reign extended far beyond the famous Hagia Sophia to encompass a comprehensive building program that strengthened imperial defenses while creating monuments that proclaimed Byzantine cultural achievement to contemporary and future generations. The restoration and extension of Constantinople's land walls eliminated vulnerabilities that enemies had exploited during earlier sieges, while new fortifications along threatened frontiers provided secure bases for military operations against persistent barbarian raids. The construction of underground cisterns, most notably the Basilica cistern, ensured reliable water supplies that could sustain the capital's population during extended sieges. Provincial construction projects demonstrated imperial commitment to urban development and economic prosperity throughout the empire's territories. The rebuilding of Thessalonica following earthquake damage created a major commercial center that facilitated trade between Constantinople and the western provinces, while new harbors and lighthouses improved maritime communications along coastlines threatened by piracy and naval raids. These infrastructure investments generated immediate economic benefits, while creating lasting symbols of imperial authority that reinforced political loyalty among provincial populations. The death of Justinian in 565 Anno Domini marked the end of the Byzantine Empire's most ambitious expansionist phase and initiated a period of territorial contraction that would fundamentally reshape the empire's geographic extent and strategic priorities. Justin II, Justinian's nephew and successor, inherited an empire stretched beyond its capacity to maintain effective control over its vast territories, while facing renewed threats from multiple directions. The new emperor's decision to cease tribute payments to the Persian Empire immediately precipitated renewed hostilities that would drain imperial resources for decades, while providing opportunities for other enemies to exploit. Byzantine preoccupations in the east. The Lombard invasion of Italy, beginning in 568, represented the most immediate consequence of imperial overextension, as Germanic tribes exploited the empire's reduced military presence to establish permanent settlements throughout the northern peninsula. The Lombards, led by King Alboin, systematically conquered Byzantine strongholds and established a kingdom centered at Pavia that would endure for over 2 centuries. The loss of most Italian territories eliminated a major source of imperial revenue while requiring continued military expenditures to defend remaining Byzantine enclaves around Ravenna, Rome, and in southern Italy. The simultaneous pressure from Slavic tribes along the Danube frontier created additional military burdens that the empire struggled to address effectively with its reduced manpower and financial resources. The Avars, a powerful nomadic confederation, established hegemony over much of the Pannonian Plain and used their strategic position to coordinate attacks on imperial territory while demanding tribute payments that further strained the imperial treasury. The empire's traditional strategy of playing barbarian groups against each other became increasingly difficult as these various peoples developed more sophisticated political organizations and military capabilities. The reign of Maurice from 582 to 602 demonstrated both the potential for imperial recovery and the persistent vulnerabilities that limited Byzantine strategic options. Maurice's military reforms, including the establishment of the exarchate system that combined civilian and military authority under regional commanders, created more efficient defensive structures while reducing administrative costs. The emperor's successful intervention in Persian dynastic struggles resulted in territorial gains in Mesopotamia and Armenia, while securing the eastern frontier against major attacks for nearly 2 decades. However, Maurice's fiscal policies and military demands created domestic opposition that culminated in his overthrow and execution by the centurion. Focus in 602, the usurpation triggered a devastating civil war that provided opportunities for external enemies to exploit imperial weakness while demonstrating the continuing instability of Byzantine political institutions. Phocas's brutal reign, characterized by widespread persecution of political opponents and arbitrary executions, destroyed much of the administrative competence that Maurus had rebuilt while alienating provincial populations whose support was essential for effective imperial defense. The Persian response to Maurus's murder initiated the most catastrophic military crisis in Byzantine history. Up to that point, as Khosrow II used the pretext of avenging his former ally to launch comprehensive invasions that conquered most of the empire's eastern territories. The systematic Persian advance captured major cities including Damascus, Jerusalem, and eventually reached the suburbs of Constantinople itself, while coordinated naval operations disrupted imperial communications throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The removal of the True Cross from Jerusalem to the Persian capital at Ctesiphon carried profound symbolic significance that undermined imperial prestige throughout the Christian world. The ascension of Heraclius in 610, following his successful revolt against Phocas, marked the beginning of one of the most remarkable military recoveries in medieval history. The new emperor, who had sailed from Carthage with an icon of Christ affixed to his ship's prow, immediately began reorganizing imperial defenses while developing the strategic vision that would enable eventual victory over seemingly impossible odds. Heraclius's decision to adopt Greek as the empire's official administrative language, replacing Latin, symbolized the cultural transformation that distinguished the medieval Byzantine Empire from its Roman predecessor. The emperor's military reforms fundamentally altered Byzantine strategic doctrine by abandoning traditional Roman emphasis on frontier defense in favor of mobile operations that could strike at enemy centers of power. The development of the theme system, which granted land holdings to soldier farmers in exchange for military service, created sustainable recruitment mechanisms that reduced dependence on expensive mercenary forces while strengthening imperial control over rural populations. These innovations enabled the empire to maintain effective military forces despite severe fiscal constraints and territorial losses. Heraclius's counteroffensive against Persia, beginning in 622, represented one of the most audacious military campaigns in medieval history. Rather than attempting to recover lost territories through conventional siege warfare, the emperor adopted a strategy of deep penetration raids that targeted Persian heartland territories while avoiding major enemy concentrations. The campaign's religious character, symbolized by the Asherapoitos image of Christ, carried as a military standard, transformed the conflict into a holy war that mobilized Christian populations throughout the empire, while demoralizing Persian forces who faced what appeared to be divinely supported enemies. The siege of Constantinople, by combined Avar and Persian forces in 626, created the supreme test of imperial survival during this period of crisis. The coordinated attack, involving land forces approaching the city walls, while Persian troops ferried across the Bosphorus in Slavic boats, represented the closest approach to imperial extinction since the empire's foundation. A successful defense, attributed by contemporaries to divine intervention through the Virgin Mary's intercession, preserved the imperial capital while demonstrating the effectiveness of the defensive innovations that Heraclius had implemented. The destruction of the main Persian army at Nineveh in 627 achieved decisive victory that enabled the restoration of imperial authority throughout the recovered eastern territories. Heraclius' triumphal restoration of the True Cross to Jerusalem in 629 symbolized the completion of imperial recovery while re-establishing Byzantine prestige throughout the Christian world. However, the mutual exhaustion of both empires created strategic vulnerabilities that would prove catastrophic when faced with the unprecedented challenge of Arab Islamic expansion beginning in the 630s. The emergence of Islam as a unifying force throughout the Arabian Peninsula created a military and ideological challenge that neither the Byzantine nor Persian empires were prepared to address effectively. The Arab armies that erupted from the desert combined religious enthusiasm with sophisticated military tactics that proved devastatingly effective against traditional imperial defensive strategies. The speed and coordination of early Islamic conquests revealed the extent to which prolonged Byzantine-Persian warfare had weakened both empires' capacity for effective resistance against determined and unified adversaries. The Battle of Yarmouk in 636 represents one of the most decisive defeats in Byzantine military history, permanently eliminating imperial control over Syria and Palestine, while opening the route to further Arab advances. The loss of these wealthy and strategically vital provinces deprived the empire of major tax revenues and recruited populations while establishing enemy bases that could support continued operations against remaining imperial territories. The psychological impact of losing Jerusalem, Christianity's holiest city, undermined imperial legitimacy throughout the Christian world while providing propaganda victories for Islamic expansion. The Arab conquest of Egypt between 639 and 642 eliminated the empire as most important source of grain supplies while providing Islamic forces with naval bases that enabled attacks on imperial islands and coastal territories throughout the Mediterranean. The loss of Alexandria, one of the ancient world's greatest cities and a major center of Christian theological scholarship, symbolized the magnitude of imperial territorial contraction within a single generation. The administrative sophistication and religious tolerance that characterized early Islamic rule often made Arab conquest preferable to continued Byzantine taxation and religious persecution for many provincial populations. The empire's survival during this period of unprecedented crisis depended largely on the defensive advantages provided by Constantinople's geographic position and the strength of the Theodosian walls. The capital's location between Europe and Asia enabled coordination of remaining imperial territories, while its maritime access provided opportunities for maintaining communications with distant provinces despite enemy control of land routes. The city's economic resources and cultural prestige sustained imperial morale, while attracting refugees and resources from conquered territories who brought valuable skills and knowledge to the remaining imperial heartland. The 7th century transformation of the Byzantine Empire represented one of the most dramatic institutional and cultural changes in medieval history as the empire adapted to unprecedented territorial losses while developing new systems of governance that would define its character for the remainder of its existence. The theme system, which emerged during this period of crisis, fundamentally altered the relationship between imperial authority and provincial populations by creating military districts where soldier farmers received land grants in exchange for hereditary military service obligations. The development of themes began as an emergency response to the empire's inability to maintain traditional, professional armies while defending vast frontiers against multiple enemies. The word theme derived from the Greek thema, meaning that which is placed, originally referred to military units stationed in particular regions before evolving to describe the territories themselves. The system's genius lay in its combination of military necessity with agricultural productivity, creating sustainable defense mechanisms that required minimal imperial expenditure while strengthening local communities' investment in territorial security. The Anatolian themes, established first in the regions most threatened by Arab raids, provided the laboratory for institutional innovations that would spread throughout the empire's remaining territories. The Anatolic theme, centered around Amorium, controlled the central plateau's strategic routes, while the Armeniacan theme guarded the northeastern approaches that had traditionally served as invasion corridors for Persian and Arab armies. The Thracian theme protected the western coastal regions that provided maritime access to Constantinople, while the Opsikian theme secured the approaches to the imperial capital itself. The theme system's social implications proved as significant as its military innovations, creating a class of farmer soldiers whose interests aligned closely with imperial survival while providing opportunities for social mobility based on military merit rather than aristocratic birth. Theme commanders, known as strategoi, wielded both civilian and military authority within their jurisdictions, enabling rapid responses to external threats while maintaining the administrative functions necessary for tax collection and justice administration. This concentration of power created potential for rebellion, but the system's decentralized structure prevented any single theme from accumulating sufficient resources to challenge imperial authority directly. The Arab siege of Constantinople from 717 to 718 represented the ultimate test of these defensive innovations and marked the decisive turning point in the empire's struggle for survival against Islamic expansion. The siege, involving over 100,000 troops and a fleet of nearly 2,000 vessels, represented the most determined attempt to eliminate the Byzantine Empire and complete Islamic conquest of the Christian Mediterranean world. The Arab commander, Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, had coordinated the campaign for years, accumulating supplies and equipment sufficient for an extended siege, while timing the assault to coincide with favorable weather conditions. Emperor Leo III's defense of the capital demonstrated both the effectiveness of recent military reforms and the continuing advantages provided by Constantinople as unique geographic position. The emperor's use of Greek fire against the Arab fleet provided a technological advantage that neutralized enemy naval superiority, while the strength of the Theodosian walls frustrated repeated assault attempts. The city's extensive cistern system enabled the population to withstand blockade conditions, while the empire's remaining naval forces maintained limited communication with outside territories. The siege's ultimate failure resulted from a combination of military resistance, diplomatic maneuvering, and environmental factors that demonstrated the resilience of Byzantine defensive strategies. Leo's successful negotiation of Bulgarian assistance created a second front that divided Arab attention, while severe winter weather imposed logistical burdens that the invading forces proved unable to sustain. The Arab withdrawal in August 718 marked the end of major Islamic attempts to capture Constantinople and establish the empire's survival as a permanent feature of medieval Mediterranean politics. The iconoclastic controversy that dominated Byzantine politics and religious life from 726 to 843 emerged directly from the military and spiritual crisis created by Islamic conquests, while reflecting fundamental tensions about the nature of Christian worship and imperial authority. Emperor Leo III's prohibition of religious images in 726 represented an attempt to address what many interpreted as divine displeasure with imperial defeats, while also responding to Islamic and Jewish criticisms of Christian image veneration as idolatrous. The emperor's edict ordering the removal of the famous Christ image from the Chalk Gate sparked immediate opposition that would divide Byzantine society for over a century. The theological arguments surrounding iconoclasm reflected sophisticated debates about the incarnation, the nature of religious art, and the proper relationship between earthly and divine authority that engaged the finest minds of the medieval Christian world. Iconoclastic theologians argued that images necessarily either divided Christ's divine and human natures or confused them, creating theological problems that could only be resolved through complete elimination of religious art. Orthodox defenders, led by figures like John of Damascus and later Theodore of Studium, maintained that images provided legitimate means of venerating divine prototypes while educating illiterate populations about Christian truths. The political dimensions of iconoclasm proved as significant as its theological aspects, as emperors used image prohibition to assert imperial authority over ecclesiastical institutions while confiscating monastic wealth that could be redirected toward military expenditures. The destruction of religious artwork eliminated symbols of local identity and regional autonomy while centralizing religious authority under imperial control. Monastic communities, which had accumulated vast landholdings and maintained significant political influence, found their economic foundations undermined by imperial policies that redistributed their properties to military settlers. Popular resistance to iconoclastic policies created persistent internal tensions that weakened imperial unity during periods when external threats required maximum social cohesion. The Empress Irene's restoration of image veneration in 787 provided temporary resolution, but the renewal of iconoclastic policies under Leo V in 815 demonstrated the continuing political utility of image prohibition for emperors seeking to strengthen imperial authority. The final restoration of icons in 843 under Empress Theodora created the religious settlement that would characterize Orthodox Christianity throughout its subsequent development. The reign of Constantine V from 741 to 775 exemplified both the military effectiveness and internal costs of iconoclastic policies during the empire as gradual recovery from 7th century disasters. Constantine's systematic campaigns against the Bulgarian kingdom achieved remarkable success through innovative siege techniques and coordinated land-sea operations that demonstrated renewed imperial military capability. The emperor's victory at Anchialus in 763 temporarily restored Byzantine dominance in the Balkans, while his capture of numerous Bulgarian strongholds forced Khan Telerik to seek peace on favorable imperial terms. Constantine's administrative reforms strengthened the theme system while creating new military units that provided greater strategic flexibility than traditional limitanae formations. The establishment of special regiments recruited from specific ethnic communities enabled the empire to utilize the military skills of Armenian, Slavic, and other populations while maintaining imperial control through careful distribution of these forces among different themes. The emperor's construction of new fortifications along threatened frontiers provided secure bases for offensive operations, while his improvement of the imperial fleet restored Byzantine naval capabilities that had been neglected during the previous century's defensive focus. The social and religious policies that earned Constantine the epithet Copronymus from his Orthodox opponents demonstrated the continuing tensions between imperial effectiveness and popular acceptance that characterized iconoclastic rule. The emperor's systematic persecution of icon-venerating monks included public humiliations, forced marriages for religious celibates, and confiscation of monastic properties that generated significant revenues for military purposes while creating lasting resentment among religious communities. These policies achieved their intended goals of weakening monastic political influence and redirecting resources toward imperial defense, but at the cost of internal unity that would eventually contribute to iconoclasm's abandonment. The Bulgarian Wars during Constantine's reign revealed both the restored capabilities of imperial military forces and the persistent challenges created by hostile neighbors who had established permanent bases within territories that Byzantium considered its legitimate heritage. The systematic nature of Constantine's campaigns, involving careful logistical preparation and coordination between multiple military columns, demonstrated the institutional learning that had occurred since the military disasters of the previous century. The emperor's use of naval forces to support land operations and his development of siege techniques specifically adapted to Bulgarian fortification styles showed tactical innovations that would influence Byzantine military doctrine for centuries. With the passing of Constantine V in 775, the empire entered a period of alternating resurgence and uncertainty that would culminate in the spectacular revival of the Macedonian dynasty a century later, when Irene of Athens seized the throne as regent for her young son Constantine VI in 780. She brought the first woman to rule the Romans in her own right, ending the first phase of iconoclasm by restoring the veneration of images at the Second Council of Nicaea in 787. Her religious settlement eased domestic tensions, yet her political machinations, including the blinding of her son, alienated the army and bureaucracy, and she was eventually deposed by the finance minister Nicephorus I in 802. Nicephorus attempted sweeping fiscal reforms, tightening tax collection, and resettling populations to rebuild the war-ravaged Anatolian countryside, but he fell in battle against the Bulgars at Pliska in 811. His death plunged the court into a succession crisis that ended only when the Armenian general Leo V seized power in 813. Leo revived iconoclasm, hoping, as earlier emperors had, that divine favor would return if images were again removed, but his assassination in Hagia Sophia on Christmas Eve 820 proved that religious policy alone could not guarantee stability. The next durable regime emerged from a most unlikely source. Michael II, nicknamed the Amorian, rose from humble Phrygian origins, survived multiple revolts, and laid the groundwork for a dynasty that would rule for nearly half a century. His son Theophilos continued defensive wars against the Abbasid Caliphate while sponsoring an impressive building program in Constantinople. When Theophilos died in 842, the empire again depended on a woman regent, Empress Theodora, who ended iconoclasm permanently in 843, a victory still celebrated each year in Orthodox churches as the triumph of orthodoxy. Theodora's restoration of icons coincided with wider cultural renewal. Monasteries flourished, manuscript copying accelerated, and scholars such as Leo the mathematician re-established the University of Constantinople as a beacon of learning. Those developments set the stage for the ascent of Basil, the first in 867, founder of the Macedonian dynasty. Basil's coup against Michael III ended Amorian rule and ushered in what later historians would hail as Byzantium's Golden Age. Basil I, 867 to 886, proclaimed himself restorer of Roman greatness. He reorganized the legal code, initiating the massive basilica project that would Hellenize Justinian's Latin laws and make them accessible to Greek-speaking jurists. At sea, his admirals checked Arab piracy in the Aegean, while on land, his armies campaigned into Cilicia and northern Syria, pushing back the Muslim frontier for the first time in generations. Although Basil's sudden death in a hunting accident cut short some plans, most famously a projected reconquest of Sicily, he left the treasury full and the frontiers secure. Under Leo VI, the Wise, 886 to 912, imperial administration reached new levels of sophistication. The emperor completed the 60-book basilica, issued 113 new novels, laws, and compiled manuals on everything from military tactics to court ceremony, codifying the rituals that surrounded the imperial person. Yet military fortunes proved mixed. The loss of Taormina in 902 finished the Arab conquest of Sicily, and a disastrous expedition against Crete in 911 left the Byzantine fleet in ruins. Even so, the empire's economic base kept expanding. Population rose, provincial towns revived, and long-distance trade funneled silk, furs, and spices through the capital's bustling harbors. By the mid-10th century, a cadre of soldier emperors Romanos, the first Lecaponos, Nicephorus II Phocas, and John, the first Simoisks, transformed renewed economic strength into aggressive foreign policy. Romanos I, 920 to 944, checked Bulgarian power through adroit diplomacy, built the first permanent Byzantine navy in generations, and enacted land laws to defend smallholders against encroaching magnates, preserving the peasant soldier base of the Themes. Nicephorus II, hailed by contemporaries as the White Death of the Saracens, recaptured Crete in 961, ending 150 years of Muslim piracy that had terrorized the Aegean. 2 years later, he seized Antioch, restoring a city lost since the Persian Wars of the 7th century. John I pressed deeper into Mesopotamia, occupying Mosul and forcing tribute from the Hamdanid Emirate. By 976, the eastern frontier lay hundreds of kilometers east of where it had stood 2 centuries earlier. All of these triumphs reached their zenith under Basil II, 976 to 1025, remembered as the Bulgar Slayer. Early in his reign, Basil faced repeated rebellions by great Anatolian families Skleros, then Phocas, whose private armies rivaled the imperial Tagmata. He suppressed both revolts and turned upon Tsar Samuel of Bulgaria, who for decades had raided as far south as the Peloponnese. After a relentless 20-year campaign, Basil shattered Bulgarian power at the Battle of Cleidion in 1014. Legend claims he blinded 15,000 prisoners, sending them home in groups of 100 led by a one-eyed guide, a ruthless message that broke Samuel's will. By 1018, the First Bulgarian Empire had vanished, its lands reorganized into new Balkan themes that extended Byzantine rule to the Danube. Basil II's victories crowned an era of strategic dominance. To the east, Armenia accepted vassalage. Georgia and the Emirates of Aleppo paid tribute. In Italy, Catapanate forces pushed the Lombards back to the Apennines and regained Capua and Bari. Meanwhile, Byzantium projected soft power through missionary work. Cyril and Methodius had already created the Glagolitic script for Slavic converts. And in 988, Prince Vladimir of Kiev accepted baptism from Byzantine priests, tying the emerging Rus polity to Constantinople's cultural orbit. Yet the very success of the Macedonian system sowed seeds of decline. Prolonged warfare enriched military aristocrats, allowing families like the Komnoi and Dukai to amass vast estates at the expense of the free peasant base that had sustained the themes. After Basil II's death, a succession of weak rulers squandered the overflowing treasury on court largesse while neglecting frontier defense. Peasant holdings collapsed under mounting tax pressure, forcing many former soldiers to seek tenancy under great landlords, thereby eroding the empire's reserve of native troops. The final blow to Macedonian hegemony came from the east. In 1040, Turkic mercenaries in Absi's service migrated into Armenia and Anatolia, probing the weakened Byzantine periphery. 5 years later, the Seljuk clan under Tugrul Beg captured Baghdad. By 1068, his nephew Alp Arslan was raiding Cappadocia. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes gathered an army of Tagmata and mercenaries, marched east, and encountered the Seljuks at Manzikert in 1071. The resulting defeat, compounded by treachery within the imperial ranks, opened Anatolia to Turkish settlement and shattered the strategic depth on which Byzantine security had long depended. The catastrophe at Manzikert sent shockwaves through the empire's political core. Romanos IV, captured by Alp Arslan, was soon deposed in Constantinople, and rival factions of the Doukas and Komnenos families plunged the capital into civil war. In the vacuum, Turkic clans streamed across the plateau, establishing beyliks from Pontus to Pamphylia. Villages that had supplied the Anatolian themes emptied. Tax registers turned blank. The old road system that linked garrison towns to the capital crumbled under neglect. For the first time since the 7th century, Constantinople itself felt exposed, its land walls no longer buffered by a depth of loyal provinces. Amid the chaos, Alexios Komnenos, an energetic general in his early 20s, gathered supporters among the palace guard and marched on the capital. In April 1081, he seized the throne, founding a dynasty that would dominate imperial politics for a century. Alexios inherited an empty treasury, a debased currency, and simultaneous invasions on every frontier. Normans under Robert Guiscard in the west, Pecheneg raiders in Thrace, and Seljuk warlords occupying the Asian shore opposite the capital. The new emperor's first act was pragmatic. He melted church plate to pay mercenaries, apologizing to the clergy with the grim words, "It is not I who take, but necessity." The Norman threat came first. Guiscard's army captured Dyrrhachium and pushed deep into Thessaly before disease and Venetian sea power hired by Alexios through generous trade privileges sapped the invasion. When Guiscard died in 1085, the western danger subsided, but fresh disasters arose on the Balkan plains. In 1091, Pecheneg horsemen crossed the Danube in overwhelming numbers, raiding as far as the outskirts of Constantinople. Alexios brokered an alliance with the nomadic Cumans, lured them south with gifts of gold, then surprised the Pecheneg camp at Mount Livonian. By evening, the steppe confederation was annihilated, ending a century-long menace to the Thracian themes. Victory bought breathing space, yet Asia Minor remained largely lost. To reclaim it, the emperor looked unusually westward. At Piacenza in March 1095, he asked Pope Urban II for a few hundred armored knights as specialists in siege warfare. Urban, sensing opportunity to unite Christendom and extend papal influence, transformed the request into a grand call for pilgrimage and liberation. The First Crusade that reached Constantinople in 1096 numbered tens of thousands far more than Alexios anticipated. Using shrewd diplomacy and oaths of homage, he redirected the Crusader hosts across the Bosphorus, guiding them to retake Nicaea and western Anatolia before they swept south toward Jerusalem. By 1101, the emperor controlled a contiguous chain of forts from the Aegean coast to the Meander Valley. By 1112, he had re-established secure land corridors to the great military road at Doralion. Along the way, he overhauled the currency, issuing the high-grade gold hyperpyron that stabilized imperial finances for 2 centuries. Merchants returned to provincial fairs. Tax receipts from reclaimed districts once again flowed into the venerable Nia epigraph account books of the Exchequer. When Alexios died in 1118, the empire was smaller than the sprawling realm of Basil II, yet far more coherent than the broken state he had inherited. His son John II, called the Good, preferred the campaign tent to the palace hall. For a quarter century, he rode from frontier to frontier, sealing the Black Sea coast against nomads, refortifying Cilicia, and pressing into northern Syria. John traveled with a portable chapel and a physician versed in Arab medicine, embodying the disciplined piety admired by future chroniclers. His unexpected death from an infected arrow wound on a boar hunt in 1143 passed power to his brilliant but impulsive heir Manuel I. Manuel Comnenos envisioned Constantinople as arbiter of a pan-Mediterranean order. He cultivated Latin knights at his court, jousted in full armor before cheering crowds, and reopened the ancient harbor at Atalaya to Christian pilgrims bound for the Holy Land. Diplomatically, he played Venice against Genoa, the papacy against the German emperor, edging Byzantium back into great power politics. Yet his ambitions strained the fiscal reforms of his grandfather. Campaigns in Italy, grand embassies to Aquitaine, and lavish subsidies to Crusader princes bled the treasury. Worse, Venetian merchants rewarded with low customs duties for earlier military aid now dominated urban markets, undercutting native guilds and provoking anti-Latin riots. In 1176, the emperor led an immense field army eastward, aiming to crush the Seljuk Sultanate of Rome. At the pass of Myriokellen, a column strung out between narrow limestone ridges. Turkish horse archers peppered the baggage train, collapsing supply wagons and spreading panic. Manuel escaped with the core of his guard, but the battle ended hopes of restoring full control over Anatolia. "Do not seek another Manzikert," an aged courtier warned him, and the advice rang ominously true. After Manuel's death in 1180, the Comnenian system unraveled with startling speed. Regency quarrels, heavy taxation, and aristocratic rivalries birthed local rebellions from Bulgaria to Cyprus. Andronikos, the first Komnenos, last adult male of the lineage, seized the throne through populist promises to curb corruption. For a moment, the capital's commoners hailed him as a champion. Then his paranoia surfaced. Massacres of Italian residents in 1182 poisoned relations with the Western powers. Executions of nobles spread terror through the ranks of potential allies. In 1185, as Norman fleets from Sicily sacked Thessalonica, the city mob rose against Andronikos, tearing him limb from limb in the Hippodrome, where imperial chariots once raced. Power passed to the Angeloi, a cadet line infamous in later chronicles for self-indulgence and short-sightedness. Under Isaac II and Alexios III, the state apparatus decayed. Provincial governors withheld taxes. Soldiers deserted unpaid garrisons. Even the chain of beacons that once flashed frontier alerts to the capital fell dark from neglect. Yet Constantinople itself still glittered. The opalescent marbles of Hagia Sophia gleamed under lamplight. Gold mosaics caught the flicker of 1,000 candles. Spice merchants from Alexandria mingled with wool traders from Bruges along the Mersey. Outsiders saw wealth without discipline, a temptation soon exploited. For in 1202, a new crusading host gathered in Venice, ostensibly bound for Egypt. Unable to pay transport fees to the Doge, the Crusaders agreed to attack Zara, a Christian rival city, as part payment. From that compromise, Venetian strategy shifted the expedition's course ever eastward toward the Bosphorus. Byzantine politics once more provided an opening. The deposed Prince Alexios Angelos promised vast sums and church union with Rome if the Crusaders restored him. Thus, in July 1203, Latin sails filled the Golden Horn. Summer light shimmered on the Golden Horn as Venetian galleys loomed before the sea walls. Their high prows glittered with painted saints. Their decks bristled with armored men who sang hymns in a tongue few Byzantines understood. Inside the city, panicked crowds thronged the Forum of Constantine, for they sensed that this crusade, unlike those of a century earlier, had come not to aid the empire, but to shape its fate. The first assault ended quickly. Greek fire launched from the towers forced the fleet to break formation, and Frankish knights who tried scaling the land walls found themselves hurled backward by stones and arrows. Yet morale within Constantinople collapsed when torchlight revealed the banner of Alexios Angelos, the exiled prince raised on a crusader mast. Court officials, eager for change, opened the Golden Gate. Emperor Alexios III fled with jewels sewn into saddlebags, and the Crusaders installed the young Alexios IV beside his restored father, Isaac II. Promises soon unraveled. Alexios IV had pledged 200,000 silver marks, military help to conquer Egypt, and formal union with Rome. But the treasury lay barren, and the populace recoiled at Latin priests intoning unfamiliar rites in Hagia Sophia. Riots flared. Fires accidental or deliberate swept wooden districts along the harbor, sending pillars of smoke over marble colonnades. One January night in 1204, the Varangian guard found Alexios IV strangled in the dungeon, replaced by a usurper who called himself Alexios V. Doukas. The Crusader leaders, their patience exhausted, declared the treaties void and ordered an assault. Dawn of April 12th saw a stiff northwest wind press Venetian sails against the sea walls just as siege ladders touched stone. Within hours, defenders weakened by factional feud pulled back. Latin foot soldiers crashed through broken battlements. Standard-bearers sprinted down the platea, shouting Saint Mark. 3 days of looting followed. Mosaics were pried from churches, silk wall hangings slashed to wrap spoils, bronze horses ripped from the Hippodrome to adorn San Marco in Venice. Chronicler Nicetas Choniates, hiding near the Forum of the Ox, wept that the jewel of the world is turned to ashes. Thus the Fourth Crusade carved the empire into fragments. A Latin empire under Baldwin of Flanders claimed Constantinople. Venice seized Crete, Euboea, and key harbors. Boniface of Montferrat took Thessalonica. Yet Greek successor states rose swiftly. The Empire of Nicaea under Theodore I Lascaris, the despotate of Epirus in western Greece, and the Empire of Trebizond along the Pontic coast. Of these, Nicaea possessed the best chance to restore the ancient capital, for its Anatolian heartland still held fertile valleys, iron mines, and a veteran army hardened against Seljuk raids. Across 5 decades, the Nicaean emperors reclaimed island bases in the Propontis, rebuilt a navy from pine forests of Bithynia, and pressed slowly westward. In 1261, a detachment under the general Alexios Strategopoulos slipped through the Blacherney Gate, while the Latin garrison was absent on a raid. Fires lit the night sky as Genoese allies blockaded the Golden Horn. Latin nobles rushed to ships and fled. On August 15th, Michael VIII Palaiologos entered Hagia Sophia barefoot, incense swirling about his imperial crown. The Byzantine Empire revived, but to chronic weakness, not former glory. Michael VIII faced impossible equations. He must garrison overstretched frontiers, placate Genoa with commercial privileges that bled customs revenue, and resettle a depopulated Thrace whose fields had lain fallow since Crusader occupation. Worst of all, he provoked the Western Church by blinding the legitimate boy emperor John IV Lascaris. Pope Martin IV excommunicated Byzantium and endorsed a fresh Angevin crusade. Only astute diplomacy pitting Venice against Genoa, Aragon against Anjou kept invasion at bay. His successors could not juggle crises so deftly. Andronikos II, 1282 to 1328, slashed military spending to balance the books, dismissing the rebuilt fleet at the very moment Turkish beyliks launched fast-sailing corsairs into the Aegean. He relied instead on mercenaries, first the Catalan Company, whose veterans defeated Turks in Asia Minor yet mutinied when unpaid, ravaging Macedonia. Later Turkic auxiliaries, who settled on imperial land and soon swore loyalty to emerging Ottoman beys. Economic contraction set in. Silk workshops closed as Italian merchants monopolized export profits. Miners abandoned silver shafts inundated by groundwater. Provincial coinage devolved into copper phallus pieces of little worth outside local markets. Political authority fractured further during the civil wars of the mid-14th century. Andronikos III seized the throne from his grandfather in 1328, but his premature death left the state to a regency council riven by jealousy. The grand domestic John Kantakousenos, once mentor to the young emperor, fought palace factions led by the zealot patriarch, inciting street mobs and rival armies of Serbs, Bulgars, and Ottoman allies. For 7 desperate years, banners of blue and white Kantakouzenoi clashed with red and gold Palaiologoi amid the vineyards of Thrace. Villages burned, harvests rotted. Plague and early ripple of the Black Death moved along refugee trails, thinning an already meager populace. When Cantacuzenios finally entered the capital in 1347, he found coffers empty, ships worm-eaten, walls cracked from neglect. Yet even he abdicated after further strife, retiring to a monastery to write histories that lamented the empire's folly. Meanwhile, the Ottomans crossed permanent footing into Europe at Gallipoli in 1354, their advance unopposed by an empire exhausted from fratricide. By the turn of the 15th century, Constantinople had shrunk to an overgrown fortress city, its suburbs grazing lands for sheep, its once glittering forums silent but for beggars and monks. Still, the walls remained formidable. And though revenues dwindled, emperors manufactured dignity through ceremony. Each Easter the patriarch crowned the ruler anew beneath Hagia Sophia's great dome, reminding all that the Roman line endured. Delegations from distant Rus principalities, from Serbia, even from newly Christianized Lithuania, sought blessings and marriage alliances, acknowledging Constantinople's cultural gravity. In 1422, Sultan Murad II tested those ancient defenses, but withdrew when rumors of Hungarian crusades threatened his rear. A generation later, his son Mehmed, only 21, yet burned by visions of conquest, resolved to finish the task. Engineers cast enormous bronze bombards in Adrianople, their muzzles wide enough for a man to squat within. By April 1453, the Sultan's host encircled Constantinople. Perhaps 80,000 soldiers, a fleet crowding the Marmara, siege towers rolling on greased timbers toward the land walls. Inside, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos commanded fewer than 8,000 defenders Greeks, Genoese, Venetians under the Genoese captain Giovanni Giustiniani. Yet morale held. Priests processed along the ramparts, chanting the Akathist hymn sung by ancestors during earlier sieges. Households prepared months of beans and dried fish. Sailors stretched boom chains across the Golden Horn to block Ottoman galleys. On May 29th, after 7 weeks of bombardment, Mehmed ordered a final assault. Before dawn, Janissary columns advanced to the blare of kettle drums. Giustiniani fell wounded on the inner rampart. Panic rippled along the line. Meanwhile, Ottoman marines broke the segment at the Kirkoporta, overrunning a post left accidentally unbarred. Trumpets sounded within the city. Constantine rallied bodyguards for a last stand at the gate of St. Romanos, then disappeared amid the crush, sword in hand, imperial purple hidden beneath plain armor. As sunlight rose, the Sultan rode through the gate of Carisius. Dust choked the streets. Smoke curled from pillaged mansions. Mem dismounted before Hagia Sophia, scattering shards of broken icons with his boots, and commanding an imam to proclaim the call to prayer. Echoes of Arabic verse joined the clamor of victory bells, merging into a new soundscape that would define Istanbul for centuries. Yet even in defeat, Byzantium's legacy endured. Scholars fleeing west carried manuscripts of Plato, Euclid, and Ptolemy, nourishing the Italian Renaissance. Orthodox liturgy, once refined in the domed basilicas of Cappadocia and Thrace, found new guardians in Muscovite princes who styled themselves Tsars, claiming inheritance of the Roman idea. And the walls of Constantinople, though breached at last, remained emblem of a civilization that, for more than 1,000 years, balanced between continents, faiths, and eras, holding the line of Rome until the modern age dawned. Long after the last echo of cannon fire faded, gentle winds continued to brush the worn stones of the Theodosian walls, as if the city itself exhaled centuries of memory into the Bosphorus air. In the quiet that followed conquest, an intricate web of human stories unfolded tales of survival, migration, and cultural transplantation that would carry the spirit of Byzantium far beyond the fallen capital. Scholars gathered hurriedly in candlelit libraries to decide what precious manuscripts could be spirited away. Some bundled parchment codices of Homer, Euclid, and Galen into linen satchels. Others folded silken pages of illuminated gospels beneath travel cloaks stitched with tiny gold crosses. Under cover of darkness, they slipped onto Genoese or Cretan ships bound for Ragusa, Venice, and Florence. Each vessel became a floating ark of classical wisdom, its hull creaking as waves lapped against cargo holds filled not with spices or textiles, but with fragile ideas that would soon ignite the Italian Renaissance. Within the city walls, remaining artisans adapted to new patrons. Mosaists who once pieced shimmering tesserae into Christ Pantocrator now laid turquoise arabesques for Ottoman mosques. Bronze casters recast imperial statues into crescent-topped finials. Stonemasons who had carved double-headed eagles now etched verses from the Korabane in flowing Thuluth script. Change came swiftly, yet the measured rhythm of workshops, the tap of hammer on chisel, the hiss of bellows at dawn, continued almost unbroken, preserving craft lineages that stretched back to late antiquity. Across the Black Sea, in Moldavian monasteries and Muscovite scriptoria, emigre calligraphers rekindled the art of minuscule handwriting. They taught Slavic novices how to sharpen reed pens, how to mix lamp-black ink with honey for lasting sheen, how to breathe life into letters so that each page seemed to pulse with silent chant. These quiet techniques transformed distant wooden churches into new centers of learning, their cedar walls fragrant with wax and prayer. Among the common folk, songs of exile took root. Lullabies once sung along the Golden Horn drifted into Balkan valleys, where shepherds wove them into panpipe laments that mingled Greek refrains with flock harmonies. Fishermen on the Dalmatian coast mended nets while telling children about a marble emperor who, legend insisted, slept beneath Hagia Sophia and would rise when the moon turned to blood. Such myths offered solace promises that loss could ripen into future renewal, that the thread of history, though frayed, remained unbroken. Meanwhile, diplomatic ripples spread westward. When Lorenzo de' Medici welcomed Cretan scribe George Hermonymus to Florence, he received not only a tutor in Greek, but a living conduit to Platonic dialogues unstudied for a millennium. Printers in Venice soon rushed to set Aldine typefaces that mimicked Byzantine letter forms. Scholars in Paris debated Aristotle with accents learned from Thessalonian refugees. Across Europe, the very cadence of humanist discourse began to resonate with an Eastern timbre. Yet the most enduring legacy flowered in lands newly calling themselves the Third Rome. In Moscow, Grand Prince Ivan III married Sophia Palaiologina, niece of the last emperor, and adopted the double-headed eagle as dynastic emblem. Court ceremonials borrowed freely from the vanished metropolis. White-robed chanters processed before gilded icons. Ayars prostrated themselves in a ritual previously reserved for the basileus. And Russian scribes translated the Byzantine Book of Ceremonies, adapting its intricate choreography to the snowy corridors of the Kremlin. Here, on the edge of dense pine forests, Constantinople's vision of sacred monarchy found fresh soil. Back in Anatolia, small Greek communities persisted under Ottoman rule, their churches tucked behind wooden screens called iconostases. Priests wearing black kalimaki hats intoned ancient liturgies in candlelit naves scented with frankincense, their syllables echoing softly beneath new domes capped by crescents. Ottoman authorities, keen to harness local expertise, allowed these congregations relative autonomy through the millet system, a structure that preserved hierarchies of patriarchs, bishops, and parish councils, thereby extending Byzantine ecclesiastical order into an Islamic imperial frame. Seasons turned. Cherry blossoms, once admired by emperors, carpeted monastery courtyards in Mount Athos. Snowmelt coursed through the cisterns of Constantinople, where carp now swam among fallen columns, glimmering in aquamarine gloom. Pilgrims from both faiths paused at ruined chapels along the maze, tracing faint frescoes with reverent fingertips. They listened, perhaps, for residual hymns rumored to linger like sea mist inside the half-collapsed vaults. And always, somewhere, a quiet scribe added another line to the unending chronicle. He wrote of earthquakes and eclipses, of border skirmishes and saintly visions, but also of silkworms still spinning golden thread in Bithynian mulberry groves, and of vineyards in Monemvasia, where grapes pressed into sweet Malvasia wine hearkened back to feasts in Justinian's day. Through such humble details the memory of Byzantium glowed, steady as a vigil lamp sheltered from wind. Even the Ottoman sultans, heirs by conquest, could not escape fascination with their Byzantine predecessors. Mehmed II commissioned Greek scholars to catalog imperial archives. He studied the military treatises of Leo VI, pondering phalanx drills alongside cannon trajectories. Later, Suleiman the Magnificent walked the echoing galleries of the Blashorny Palace and imagined new laws that might rival Justinian's code in scope and clarity. Thus, like a subterranean river, Byzantine influence continued its unseen course, nourishing distant gardens of art, faith, and governance long after the visible edifice had crumbled. And if you listen gently, in the hush before sleep, you may still hear faint footfalls down marble corridors, the rustle of silk trains sweeping mosaic floors, the murmur of multilingual courtiers debating theology beneath golden domes. These are not merely echoes of a vanished age. They are reminders that great civilizations never truly die. They dissolve into countless lives, breathe through borrowed words, and whisper across time until receptive hearts revive them anew. Let your mind rest upon that whispered continuity. Picture the Bosphorus at dusk, purple clouds mirrored in calm water, cormorants gliding toward distant fishing boats, the first evening lamps kindling along wooden piers. Somewhere a solitary bell tolls, joined by the distant call to prayer, the two sounds weaving a single lullaby over the sleeping city. Feel the cool, salt breeze, scented with pine from Asian hillsides, drift through open colonnades. Let the rhythmic wash of water against harbor quays lull your breathing into deeper calm, as the story of Byzantium folds gently around you like a silken cloak, resilient, luminous, and endlessly unfolding. Remember now the gleam of Justinian's code, patiently copied onto calfskin pages by generations of jurists. Those yellowed folios crossed Alps and Pyrenees in merchants' trunks, whispering principles of contract, inheritance, and civic duty to Renaissance law students who would one day advise kings and draft constitutions. Because of Byzantium, modern civil law still rests on the ancient maxim pacta sunt servanda. Agreements must be kept, just as marble judges in Constantinople once quoted it beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Bouleuterion. Picture 2. The Byzantine classroom. A low wooden desk, reed pens soaking in inkwells of walnut dye, children chanting Homeric verses beside psalms in melodious antiphony. Greek literacy, preserved through sieges and plagues, became a thread that stitched classical wisdom onto the fabric of Slavic, Georgian, and Armenian cultures. Cyril and Methodius, dispatched from the imperial court, adapted letters to Slavic tongues, planting the seeds of the Cyrillic script. Today, when a student in Sofia or Novosibirsk traces ligatures across a workbook page, her pencil still follows grooves first carved by those missionary brothers under flickering oil lamps in Thessalonica. In sacred spaces from Novgorod to Nairobi, domes rise on pendentus, a structural miracle first perfected in Hagia Sophia. Light floods downward, striking gold tesserae that tilt at precise angles to catch dawn sun and candle glow alike. Architects across centuries copied that ethereal balance of mass and weightlessness. Ottoman master Sinan at Suleimani, Russian builders at St. Basil's, even modern engineers who design glass-clad stadiums with soaring barrel vaults. They all inherit the mathematicians of Constantinople, who proved stone by stone that geometry could evoke the heavens. Listen for a moment to liturgical echoes. The deep drone of the Isan underpins a choir's slow-moving chant. Over it, a bright melody trembles like silver thread. That musical idiom, neither wholly Eastern nor Western, sprang from Cappadocian caves and palace chapels, traveled along caravan routes, and nested in Balkan mountain monasteries. It hums still in Sunday services, where cantors mark rhythm by gently beating carved wooden talanda, the same instruments monks once used to summon brethren before iron bells were forged. Byzantine diplomacy, honed amid fragile frontiers, bequeathed the art of soft power. Envoys bearing silks and relics learned to weigh tributary payments against marriage alliances, to draft treaties in multiple alphabets, to deploy theological nuance as deftly as cavalry charges. Modern embassies circulating cultural exhibits, negotiating ceasefires, trading tariff for recognition echo lessons scripted in the chancery of the Great Palace, where scribes prepared letters addressed to the Caliph, brother in Abraham. Consider daily life. Glazed ceramics from Iznik trace color palettes, first mixed in imperial kilns. Spiced honey cakes sold at Greek festivals mirror recipes listed in a 10th century Opsarian cookbook. Folk embroidery of Thrace repeats double-headed eagles and palmate scrolls once stitched on imperial robes. Through such humble survivals, the empire's aesthetic flows quietly into modern kitchens. And wardrobes, reminding us that history persists most faithfully in gestures of the hand and flavors on the tongue. Even in spheres of science, Byzantine observational tables fed later Islamic astronomers. who in turn transmitted algebraic methods back to Europe. Medical compendia by physicians like Paul of Aegina guided Arab, Latin, and Persian healers. Inside a present-day operating theater, protocols of antiseptic preparation descend partly from those 6th century treatises that urged clean instruments, boiled linens, and prayers for steady hands. Now allow all these streams, legal, linguistic, artistic, diplomatic, to merge within a gentle mental panorama. Imagine drifting above a twilight map where glowing threads stretch outward from the Bosphorus. One lights the Dnieper, another curls toward Venice, a third arcs across the Levant to Ethiopia. Each filament pulses softly, carrying words, pigments, melodies, and statutes through time. Breathe in as the web brightens. Breathe out as it dims to star points, settling into tranquil order. As you settle, visualize an empty colonnade along Constantinople's old maze. Moonlight pools on porphyry slabs. Ivy climbs a cracked capital carved with acanthus leaves. Far off, a nightingale sings above the cistern's still water. You sit upon a fallen drum of marble, fingertips tracing ancient chisel marks. Every stone beneath you holds stories layered like sediment siege cries, coronation hymns, market haggles, scholarly debates. Yet tonight they murmur only a single lullaby. All things pass, yet meaning endures. Let that refrain guide your breath. Inhale for 4 heartbeats. Feel the hush of vaulted naves. Hold for 4. Sense the resilience of parchment hidden from flames. Exhale for 6. Release the weight of empires lost. Again inhale, hold, exhale until thought slows to the pace of gentle lapping along the sea of Marmara. If stray worries intrude, set them on a miniature drano and watch the vessel glide toward a horizon painted in alizarin and lapis. The ship's triangular sail catches calm wind. Its wake leaves only ripples that dissolve in silver moon rays. When the stern lantern finally merges with skyshine, your concerns, too, will have drifted beyond sight. Now the city's myriad voices recede into one soft tide, rhythmic and steady. With eyelids heavy, surrender to that cadence, for the saga of Byzantium vast, intricate, and luminous stands guard over your dreams, keeping night watch as once its soldiers patrolled ramparts beneath constellations unchanged since antiquity. Let us wander now through the quieter galleries of Byzantium's inheritance, those subtler currents that flow beneath, grand monuments and famous laws, shaping daily habits you might never suspect arose beside the Bosphorus. Begin with food, for nourishment links every generation. When you drizzle golden olive oil over warm bread, you repeat a gesture familiar to merchants in Justinian's Constantinople. The empire regulated oil presses with the same care it applied to coinage, ensuring purity so thorough that modern Mediterranean standards still echo those decrees. Honey cakes scented with cinnamon, cloves, and a whisper of pepper trace their lineage to palace kitchens where eunuch stewards balanced sweet and pungent to please imperial palates. Even the practice of savoring dried figs at the end of a meal thought to settle the stomach travels from monastic refectories perched on Cappadocian cliffs. Picture a Byzantine home at dusk. A clay lamp, fueled by clarified sheep fat, casts soft amber halos across painted plaster walls. A mother sets a brass basin near the hearth, pouring heated water for her children to wash, an echo of Roman hygiene sustained long after baths disappeared in Western Europe. She sprinkles lavender petals atop the water, believing the fragrance wards off night spirits. Modern aromatherapy would agree that the scent eases breath and calms the nervous system. Such continuities remind us that simple comforts outlast political tumults. Move next to timekeeping. The empire introduced the canonicon, a roster dividing day and night into fixed prayer intervals. Monks rang wooden semantra before sunrise, at terce, sext, and none, long before mechanical clocks chimed hours in Gothic towers. Today, school bells, shift whistles, and digital alerts follow that same rhythm of structured hours. Secular heirs to a monastic cadence designed to balance labor and contemplation. Consider textiles. Silk worms smuggled from China in hollow pilgrim staffs found new homes in Bithynian mulberry groves, birthing an industry so renowned that Byzantine purple still signifies majesty. Chemists analyzing modern synthetic dyes examined treatises by imperial dyers who recorded precise ratios of murex shellfish, madder root, and alum mordant. Their recipes, written in looping Greek minuscule, divulge pH adjustments and temperature stages, remarkably close to contemporary textile science. When a fashion house today unveils a deep violet evening gown under runway lights, that hue whispers of empresses who once glided beneath mosaic skies. Now recall medicine. Hospitals in Constantinople Zenones admitted women, children, and the poor centuries before similar institutions emerged in the West. Physicians such as Anna Komnene documented case histories, dosages of opium poppy for pain, and silver nitrate salves to cleanse wounds. Modern clinical charts and antiseptics inherit this spirit of systematic care. Visualize a nurse in scrubs adjusting in 4-drip. Unseen beside her stands a ghostly lineage of Byzantine healers who first argued that charity and science could dwell in one ward. Turn to cartography and exploration. Imperial ships mapped currents of the Black Sea, noting magnetic anomalies that later guided Genoese traders to Crimean ports, then Portuguese caravels beyond Africa. Their illustrated portolan charts, coated with thin egg white to resist seawater, survive in museum cases. Examine one, and you'll see red ink rum lines crisscrossing like a spider, loom threads that connect Istanbul airport flight paths, and GPS vectors of container ships still weaving global commerce. Let your thoughts stroll into language again, this time within legal jargon. Synallagma for bilateral contract, pronoia for conditional land grant, numisma for trusted currency. These vocabulary fossils rest inside modern word synergy. Prerogative. Numismatics quietly reminding office attorneys and economists of antique courts where robed officials debated debts beneath carved marble eagles. As night deepens, contemplate philosophy and spirituality. Icons silent painted windows to eternity teach focus. Gaze at one mentally. Gold ground dissolving into infinite light, a saint's elongated fingers directing your eyes toward stillness. The practice of hesychasm, inner quiet, developed on Mount Athos, instructs believers to breathe the Jesus prayer in sync with heartbeat until mind, breath, and words fuse. Modern mindfulness sessions, biofeedback monitors, and cardiac coherence apps echo that ancient insight. When breath slows, thought clears. When thought clears, compassion dawns. Now drift toward astronomy. Byzantine courtiers marveled at eclipses reflected in the Golden Horn, while scholars copied Ptolemy's Almagest, adding marginal notes on supernova, later confirmed by Chinese records. Those annotations seeded Islamic observatories in Baghdad, and centuries onward, Tycho Brahe's star catalogs. Next time you find a planet through a backyard telescope, you follow stargazers who once climbed the roof of the Imperial Observatory, their cloaks snapping in the Bosphorus wind. Finally, settle beside stories for narratives cradle cultures to sleep. Thales of Basil, the copper-handed smith of St. George, and the dragon recast in Anatolian villages of wise Emperor Heracles, outwitting. Khazars with riddles, these circulated in evening hearth circles, gradually morphing into Russian Bylany Serbian. Epic poems and even the French chansons digest. Every bedtime fairy tale today, from dragons guarded by humble heroes to lost princesses hidden in towers, carries a tinge of that Byzantine imaginative ink. Allow these vignettes to mingle like perfumed smoke curling toward a starlit oculus. Each breath you draw joins millennia of sleeper sailors on rocking dromons, monks in candlelit cloisters, scholars nodding over parchment, refugees cradled in creaking caravans. Inhale the shared hush. Exhale into belonging. The empire has ended, yet its quiet gifts oils glimmer. Hymns cadence, laws fairness, art's serenity surround you still, gentle as a blanket against the cool air of passing time. As this section closes, stretch softly, release your shoulders, and let eyelids grow heavier. The tale will resume when you wish, unfolding like another silk panel unrolled in lamplight. For now, rest within the elegant weave already revealed, trusting that the loom of history continues its patient shuttle through the night. Imagine you are walking through a modern city square, perhaps in Boston, Warsaw, or Buenos Aires. Beneath glass towers and neon signs, you notice a small domed chapel faced with pale stone, its drum pierced by narrow windows, its entrance crowned with a mosaic of Christ in shimmering gold. That quiet survivor, set among traffic lights and cafes, tells a lingering Byzantine tale. Builders everywhere still look to the ideal of a centralized plan, a luminous cupola, a meeting of heaven and earth in brick and mortar. Pause before the chapel doors. Lay a palm on the cool marble jamb. You are linked, instantly, to masons who stood on scaffolds beside Hagia Sophia nearly 15 centuries ago, handing bricks up a human chain while psalms floated in dusty sunbeams. Step back and watch commuters hurry past. Most carry wallets stamped with eagle emblems, bank cards embossed with sleek double-headed logos, or passports whose watermarks echo imperial sigils. These images, distant descendants of the Roman Byzantine eagle, convey sovereignty even when their origin is long forgotten. Symbol flows beneath consciousness like an underground spring. We drink from it daily without knowing the source. Turn next to digital fonts. Open a word processor and scroll to Palatino, Georgia, or Aramond. Their serifs and balanced stems trace ancestry to scripts perfected in Constantinople's scriptoriums, where calligraphers aimed for legibility that would honor sacred text while pleasing the eye. When a student types an essay tonight in Snow Paulo, the curve of her lowercase g carries a ghost touch of monastic reeds dipped in lampblack ink. Pass into the realm of international law. United Nations charters speak of pact-respecting nations, echoing Nomo's ideals codified under Justinian. When jurists at The Hague weigh maritime boundaries, they cite principles first debated by Rhodian sea captains and refined in Byzantine maritime ordinances. Seaborne insurance, cargo liability, even the concept of general average, traced to imperial edicts that balanced risk among merchants whose caravanserais once lined the Mersey. Slide gently toward economics of trust. The solidus Byzantium stable gold coin circulated unchanged in weight for 700 years, anchoring medieval exchange from Ireland to India. That reputation for integrity taught markets a lesson. Reliable currency is quieter than armies, yet shapes empires more lastingly. Central bank policies today, when they guard inflation targets, walk in the footsteps of minters who struck each hyperpyron under the watchful gaze of Christ Pantocrator engraved above the die. Now picture gardens, terraces where lavender, rosemary, and basil mingle with slender cypress. Such plantings, typical of Mediterranean monasteries, were arranged according to Byzantine herbals, listing medicinal virtues: basil for fever, rosemary for memory, lavender for restful sleep. When modern horticulturists designed healing gardens outside hospitals, they unknowingly echo Byzantine cloister plots intended to blend beauty, utility, and contemplative calm. Travel in thought to culinary fusion. Yogurt dressed with walnuts and thyme honey graces breakfast tables from Athens to Brooklyn. Its tart sweet harmony mirrors recipes in the Geoponica, a 10th century agricultural manual. Lemon garlic chickpea soup, now rebranded as vegan comfort food, appears nearly unchanged in an 11th century monastic cookbook. Each spoonful carries whispers from cloister refectories, where brothers dined in silence while the lector read lives of saints. Shift to sport and spectacle. The roar of crowds at a football match echoes the thunder that once shook Constantinople's hippodrome when blues and greens charged in chariot races. Team scarves, stadium chants, city with loyalties that transcend class all owe something to those ancient factions. Even public security strategies for large venues descend from edicts issued after a riot in 532, when authorities learned crowd psychology the hard way during the Nika Revolt. Now let your awareness float across oceans to the Americas, where Byzantine threads arrive indirectly on Iberian and French ships. Mission churches in Mexico display domes ringed with star motifs. Colonial law codes in Peru borrow passages from the Siete Partidas, themselves indebted to Justinian law. Ideas crossed without passports, weaving a global tapestry richer than any single loom could produce. Rest now in language once more. The word strategy comes from strategos, themed generals who balanced civil and military duties. Economy stems from oikonomia, the art of household stewardship, preached by Cappadocian fathers. Each time newscasters discuss fiscal strategy, they summon those layered meanings, not merely money and armies, but wise administration of a shared dwelling. Envision Earth itself as that household, blue-green, fragile, turning slowly through starlight, while old lessons urge moderation, foresight, and common purpose. Allow a final image before sleep draws close. A lone lamp atop the Pharos of Alexandria, rekindled in imagination, though long collapsed. Byzantine engineers maintained that lighthouse for centuries, trimming wicks, polishing bronze mirrors, so its beam could guide sailors through dark surf. Today, satellites blink overhead. Aircraft warning lights pulse on skyscrapers. Cell phone screens glow in millions of palms, but all are heirs to that same impulse. To pierce night with orientation, to proclaim, you are not lost. Safe harbor lies ahead. Let that reassurance settle into your breathing. Inhale as if drawing distant beacon light into your chest. Exhale, sending quiet radiance outward. With each cycle, the boundaries between past and present blur like reflections on moonlit water. Here, in the gentle confluence of memory and rest, the Byzantine story completes another circle rising, falling, yet always gifting sparks to future dreamers. The thread of Byzantine influence extends into the sounds that shape modern cities. Stand beside a marble fountain in Thessaloniki at noon. When church bells peal, each bronze tongue swings according to mathematical ratios set down by 9th century campanologists who studied resonance within cloister courtyards. Across the strait in Istanbul, a muezzins chant ribbons through loudspeakers fixed to minaret balconies, an audible descendant of Contagion, melodies first intoned beneath soaring vaults of the Blasharny Chapel. In subway tunnels from Athens to Montreal, engineers tune announcement chimes to intervals that avoid harmonic conflict with crowd noise. Unknowingly, they echo medieval treatises that matched psalm tones to architectural volumes, so scripture could float clearly above murmuring congregations. Shift focus to storytelling media. Illuminated manuscripts gave way to woodblock prints, which ceded to lithographs, and eventually to glowing e-ink screens. But the principle of marginal commentary, perfected by Byzantine scholia, survives. Scroll through a digital article and watch footnotes slide in from the side. Click an annotation in a scholarly PDF, and a pop-up gloss appears functions mirroring the ornate red ink. Marginalia where 12th century monks once queried Aristotle or praised Gregory Nazianzus. Even social media threads trace lineage to scholastic chains that braided citation, rebuttal, and synthesis around a core text. Consider public administration. City councils today debate zoning overlays, disaster response budgets, and heritage site maintenance concerns already codified in the Book of the Eparch, the Urban Statute Manual issued under Leo VI. That text defined bakery grain quotas, fire watch rotations, and sanitation fines. ensuring Constantinople's dense quarters remained livable. Whenever a modern municipality limits building heights to protect skyline harmony or reserves harbor space for emergency vessels, it unconsciously replays those imperial ordinances. Let us look at education models. The trivium and quadrivium curricula, revived by Carolingian scholars, themselves stem from the Magnara school, where Leo the mathematician lectured on geometry beside astrolabes and armillary spheres. From that seed grew university charters stipulating liberal arts foundations before professional specialization. A freshman today, drafting a rhetoric essay before tackling computer science, follows footsteps traced across marble lecture halls 14 centuries earlier. Travel in sentiment to interfaith dialogue. Byzantine emperors convened public disputations with Muslims, Jews, and Paulicians, seeking concord through reasoned debate. Such forums presage modern ecumenical councils and UN cultural symposia. When representatives of 5 faiths share a dais to discuss climate ethics, they echo the synods where Patriarch Photius once welcomed Arabic-speaking philosophers to argue ontology beneath hanging lamps of hammered silver. Next, art conservation. Pigment chemists analyzing fresco flaking in rural Greek chapels. Consult manuals by Michael Sellos on egg tempera binding and natural stone synopia. Ultraviolet fluorescence mapping, touted as cutting edge, reprises 12th century candlelight raking, used to reveal hidden underdrawings before final gilding. Thus laboratory white coats and monastic cowls meet across the centuries in a shared vocation, to rescue color from the abrasion of time. Pause now at the threshold of sleep. Imagine standing within Hagia Sophia at twilight after tourists depart and custodians dim electric lamps. Only the oculus of the Great Dome admits fading blue. A single pigeon settles on a cornice. Its soft coo echoes 63 times before vanishing into airy distance. You focus on that final hush. Feel your heartbeat mirror the building's ancient pulse, steady, vast, respectful of silence. Allow eyelids to droop as if weighted by incense smoke curling upward in slow spirals, carrying whispered Kyrie and whispered Allahu into the same vanishing point of the vault. Breathe deeply. Count 4 on the inhale: 1, 2, 3, 4 hold gently 2, 3 exhale for 6, emptying thoughts like spent wax from a reliquary 5, 6. With each cycle, picture mosaic tesserae drifting loose, then settling into perfect alignment, forming again the serene eyes of a saint who watches but does not judge. Any stray worry becomes just another glass shard, slipping calmly into the wider image where every color has its place. Know that sleep is itself a little resurrection, a nightly descent and rise enacted in countless Eastern Rite hymns. Surrender, then, to the velvet dark beyond your thoughts, confident that dawn-like Constantinople's fabled first light over the Golden Horn will return in due course, gilding rooftops and stirring sparrows atop tiled domes. Until that moment, let the empire's 1,000-year melody cradle you, patient cadences of endurance, collapse, renewal, and gentle, enduring light. Let your thoughts now glide toward the more hidden marvels of Byzantine science and engineering. Imagine the slender silhouette of the chain tower on Constantinople's Galata shore. A massive iron chain, coiled like a sleeping serpent, waited inside. At dusk, dockworkers hauled it across the Golden Horn, linking to a capstan on the old city side so that hostile galleys found an unbreachable barrier by moonlight. This simple yet mighty deterrent whispers forward to the steel boom nets protecting modern naval harbors, to retractable road bollards that rise at a button press, to cybersecurity firewalls that seal digital waterways each night. Now picture Leo the mathematician's beacon line, stone watchtowers stepping across Anatolia as mountain crests. Furnaces on their roofs blazed coded bursts, short, long, grouped relaying news of Arab raids from Taurus, passes to the capital in under an hour. Swap torches for fiber optics, and you glimpse the ancestry of today's optical internet, still translating danger and desire into pulses of light. Consider the legendary Greek fire. Its recipe died with the empire, yet its principle projecting burning liquid under pressure prefigures modern flamethrowers and naval napalm. Engineers filling firefighting trucks with aqueous film-forming foam employ similar pump mechanics, now turned toward rescue rather than ruin. Byzantine artisans also crafted gear trains for portable sundials, hydraulic organs, and even self-moving thrones that astonished foreign envoys. Those gear ratios re-emerged in medieval astronomical clocks, then in steam engines, finally in the reduction boxes of electric cars. History's cogs interlock across ages, clicking onward through grease, then brass, now silicon. Set these technical sparks aside and return to human resilience. Through earthquakes, plagues, sieges, and iconoclast tempests, ordinary Byzantines adjusted. Farmers grafted hardier olive varieties. Dyers shifted from murex purple to plant-based kermes when shellfish beds declined. Scribes turned to recycled palimpsests when calfskin grew scarce. Their quiet adaptability models our era's push for sustainable materials and circular economies. Pause a moment. Close your eyes and feel the padded hush of winter snowfall over the ruined land walls of Theodosius. Flakes settle on crenellations, filling arrow slits with muffling white. Exhale, and your breath plumes like incense before the half-moon. In that silence, perceive the architecture of endurance. Brick, stone, lime, and iron clamps humble stuff, yet aligned so wisely that only cannon finally breached it. Let this remind you that patient layering of simple habits, steady diet, regular sleep, mindful gratitude builds walls robust against life's bombardments. Tiptoe further into the halls of literary craft. The Byzantines loved wordplay, acrostic hymns whose first letters spelled blessings, epic poems where every 10th syllable echoed the song tone sung at coronation, modern crossword puzzles, rap verse internal rhymes, even Easter egg messages hidden in source code adopt that same delight in patterned language. Allow such cleverness to warm you, proof that wit survives dynasties. Notice, too, Byzantine gender paradoxes. An empress like Irene could summon ecumenical councils, while convent abbesses managed estates and manuscript workshops. Yet village girls still faced arranged marriages at 15. This duality feels present today. Boardroom ceilings crack, while elsewhere girls are denied schooling. History's tapestry remains imperfect. Sleep with resolve to stitch your small square brighter tomorrow. Before drifting deeper, envision a celestial vault above Cappadocian hoodoos. Stars wheel where early monks traced constellations onto frescoed cave ceilings Orion beside Archangel Michael, the Milky Way streaming like the Jordan River. Those monks debated lunar cycles to set Easter's date, work later refined into Gregorian reforms that still pace our calendars. So when your phone pings a meeting reminder on April 17th, thank those sky-gazing ascetics who first reconciled solar precision with spiritual rhythm. Now, as drowsiness thickens, imagine you hold a tiny vial of rose attar distilled at a monastic still on Mount Ida. Unstop it. Fragrance of dew-shot petals mingles with faint resin from the copper alembic. A single inhalation ushers calm across your temples, as it once soothed travelers in caravanserais. Hold that scent in memory. Let it seed serene dreams. With muscles unclenching, feel soft linen air to Byzantine flax looms cool against skin. Your pulse slows toward the tempo of oars dipping the Marmara at dawn, toward the measured cadence of monks chanting Phos Hilaron. Each heartbeat carries echoes of empire. Rise, fall, rise, rest. Let us descend now into the hidden libraries of the mind, those shadowed alcoves, where memory shelves are stacked with half-forgotten scrolls. Light a small taper and glide between rows of imagined papyrus. On one brittle roll, you find diagrams of climate machines proposed by the 10th century polymath Leo of Thessalonica. Vaulted chambers, cooled by subterranean water pipes, warmed by south-facing glass mosaics. Architects of 21st century passive house designs echo these same principles, orienting windows toward low winter sun while pulling summer air across stone floors. Innovation, you see, is often rediscovery. Turn another corner and behold Byzantine court dress preserved in careful sketches, silk tunics sewn with tiny lead weights, so fabric would fall in perfectly vertical folds. Fashion historians imitate that trick today, with hidden chains stitched into couture hems, granting garments a sway both regal and precise. Run your fingertip along embroidered pearls. Feel how steady hands once whispered serenity into every knot. Close the codex and drift to the imperial mint, where metallurgists alloyed copper with a breath of silver to resist desert corrosion. Modern electrical engineers, fusing copper with chromium to strengthen transmission lines, still quote conductivity tables, first tabulated by those same smelters beside the horn. Metallurgy, too, keeps its ancestral ledger. Step outside into an herb-scented courtyard where a plinth fountain trickles. Water arcs from bronze lions' mouths, landing in a shallow basin whose rim is carved with Greek hexameter. The world flows, yet truth abides. Listen to the splash become steady metronome for your breathing in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3. 4 till heartbeat synchronizes with liquid rhythm. Around the cloister walk small groups of scribes debating ethics of leadership. One cites Emperor John II, who refused to tax drought-stricken farmers. Another quotes Basil II, who marched with infantry to taste hardship equally. Such stories seeded later ideals of servant leadership taught in MBA seminars. When a modern manager allocates bonuses to lowest-paid staff first, a faint Byzantine echo approves. Beyond the arcade, a botanical garden blooms. Lemon trees espaliered against warm walls, saffron crocus strips glowing purple, and black-seeded sesame nodding in soft wind. Monks once crossbred these strains for flavor and resilience, forging the ancestor of today's seed banks, preserving diversity against climate swing. Pluck a leaf of mint, crush it, and let the menthol clarity sharpen inner vision. Evening settles. Lanterns ignite alabaster oil cups along the ambulatory. Their subdued glow recalls smartphone night shift screens that tint blue LEDs toward amber, the same hue that once soothed palace eyes before sleep. Technology marches, yet circadian wisdom remains. Now imagine a marble chessboard tucked beside a pillar, pieces carved as Byzantine regiments, cataphract knights, archbishops, imperial regalia for the queen. Crusaders carried this game westward, where bishops kept their diagonal command and rooks retained their fortress stride. Each casual match today, played in a park or online, reenacts campaigns once plotted in mosaic war rooms. Gaze upward. Constellations emerge where sailors of the Droman fleet once named stars after prophets and emperors. They plotted monsoon arcs to India, returning with pepper and sapphires. In their wake followed Portuguese caravels, and centuries later, shipping lanes tracked by satellite. Yet the sky remains unaltered, same Polaris, guiding restless minds toward orientation when worldly maps feel blurred. Take a final path toward a quiet infirmary. Linen-wrapped patients rest beneath icons of Christ the physician. A sister of mercy checks pulses, counts respirations, and notes observations on a wax tablet heart regular, breathing calm. Her methodology, inspection, palpation, documentation still rules modern nursing charts. Compassion layered onto protocol. The Byzantine prescription for care. Outside, snow begins to fall again. Each flake a 6-point star glistening briefly on your sleeve before melting into warmth. Accept this as metaphor. Civilizations, too, settle briefly in dazzling patterns, then dissolve, but their moisture seeps into soil where new roots drink deep. Feel that gentle melt soak through fabric, touch skin, join bloodstream heritage absorbed without effort. Let shoulders soften. Lower the lantern until its flame aligns with your slow breathing. Nearby, a bell neither gong nor chime, but a wood-struck semitron's 3 measured knocks. In monastery custom, that cue ends conversation and invites hesychia, sacred quiet. Honor it now. Allow thoughts to settle like parchment leaves closing for the night. Breath by breath, release tension from brow, jaw, throat, chest, abdomen, limbs. The empire's long story of rise and fall, of luminous domes and quiet scriptoria, has folded around you like a cloak of dust-colored silk. Trust its gentle weight. Trust the moonlit whisper, cycling through widow arches. All shall be well, and all shall be well. Eyes grow heavy. Pulse matches distant surf beyond the golden gate of old Constantinople. Let the gate swing inward on silent hinges, opening to dream gardens where cypress and olive intertwine. Step through and rest. Every story, even one stretched across 11 centuries, finds its last page. And so we arrive at the closing candles of Byzantium's long vigil, small flames, guttering gently before dawn, inviting reflection rather than regret. Imagine a tiny roadside chapel on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, built by shepherd hands 2 generations after Constantinople fell. Its rubble walls lean, its clay tile roof sags, but within miracle of persistence, a single mosaic fragment still catches sun, a sapphire wingtip of the Archangel Michael. Each morning, as sheep bells tinkle across time-scented air, that wing glints bright and fades, marking time like the slow beating of history's heart. All empires shrink to such surviving splinters, yet each splinter can refract light enough to guide a traveler home. Follow a winding track downhill to a modern village school. Children recite vowel charts, alpha, beta, gamma, unaware that their alphabet once journeyed on, Byzantine trade routes to illuminate Slavic psalters and Armenian chronicles. Their teacher holds up a tablet screen displaying a virtual tour of Hagia Sophia. Pupils pinch-zoom golden mosaics, gasping as peacocks and vine scrolls blossom under their fingertips. Technology loops the past into present play, proving that no cathedral is ever entirely lost while curiosity endures. Shift your gaze east to the silicon labs of a software startup where engineers debug cryptography protocols. They reference the Byzantine general's problem, a thought experiment likening faulty network nodes to traitorous commanders around an ancient city. Solutions found here protect billions of digital messages each day, another legacy, abstract yet potent, from the empire that lent its name. Meanwhile, in New York's Metropolitan Museum, conservators study a 12th century icon upon foam blocks. Under a microscope, they mend crackler with fish glue, the same adhesive described by monk artists in the Hermenia. Tourists later pass the panel, their audio guides noting only tempera on wood. But some will sense in the saint's almond-shaped eyes a calm that follows them out onto Fifth Avenue traffic, softening the city's harsh angles. Cross the Atlantic to São Paulo, where a graffiti artist sprays stylized halos around subway portraits, riffing on orthodox nimbus geometry. Commuters snap photos, upload to feeds, and hashtags bloom. Hashtag street icon, hashtag Neo-Byzantium. The empire sneaks through aerosol clouds, blessing hurried strangers who may never enter a church. Return finally to the quiet of your own room. Night has deepened, devices dim. The only sound is your breath. Feel the mind settle like dust upon a closed codex. You have traveled from Constantine's Nova Rama to Mehmed's Istanbul, from Greek fire to fiber optics, from chanted Kantakian to streaming playlists, and back to the still point within. The journey has woven empress and monk, architect and coder, shepherd child and curator into one tapestry whose threads now cradle you in steady silken hush. Let eyelids close. Picture once more the Bosphorus under silver moon, currents sliding past ancient quays. Hear a faint mingling of bells and call to prayer, of Latin hymn and Greek song, blending into a single lullaby. As the melody fades, whisper to yourself, empires rise, empires fall, but wisdom flows onward like water, and I drifting gently am part of that eternal stream. With that assurance, allow consciousness to slip beneath tranquil surface, where dreams unfurl like soft-lit mosaics and rest, held safe by the enduring glow of Byzantium's final lantern.